4, National Land Transport Amendment Best Practice Rail Investment Bill 2017.
The member for Indi.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I present the National Land Transport Amendment Best Practice Rail Investment Bill 2017 and the explanatory memorandum.
The Clerk.
First reading a bill for an act to amend the National Land Transport Act 2014 and for related purposes.
The member for Indi.
I am pleased to present a bill for an act to amend the National Land Transport Act 2014. This bill is to be known as the National Land Transport Act Amendment Best Practice Rail Investment Bill 2017. And in opening my comments, I'd like to acknowledge the presence in the House today of participants of the Australian Alpine Valleys Community Leadership Program and other constituents from my electorate, and how proud I am to be here as I represent our interests to improve public transport right across Australia, but particularly north-east Victoria. The purpose of this bill is to strengthen the social and community benefit considerations that are assessed when the Minister approves an investment project under the National Land Transport Act 2014. The bill adds matters which the Minister must consider when improving a project as an investment project and mandates that the Minister address each matter listed in the bill. The bill also requires a summary of evidence supporting the approval of the investment project to be published in the department website and to be tabled in Parliament. And under the amendments, when a project involves the construction of a new railway or the upgrade of an existing railway, the amendments require the Minister to consider the extent to which the project prioritises passenger rail services, demonstrates best practice in rail infrastructure investment and maximises the community benefits from the Commonwealth investment. And secondly, the extent to which the project can lift the level of service and standard of existing rail infrastructure to maximise the benefit of communities along the railway, for example, by facilitating better passenger services. The Minister would also be required to consider the extent to which the project maximises rural and regional economic and social economic benefits and the extent to which the project meets or will meet the current and future needs of the users of the infrastructure. Mr Deputy Speaker, outside of the capital cities, infrastructure investment is traditionally measured in economic terms and not in social good. Projects in the city largely focus on easing urban congestion, which is clearly a social benefit. This bill aims to address this gap. In metropolitan Australia, rail infrastructure supports dedicated networks of rail and passenger movement. In rural and regional Australia, this infrastructure is a shared resource, and decisions regarding Commonwealth investment must consider it as such. And in considering infrastructure investment in rural and regional Australia, consideration must be given to both the economic, which is clearly important, and the social value, which is equally important. And the most direct way to maximise the social benefit of rail investment is to prioritise passenger rail. An example of the gap in policy is the Inland Rail project. It proposes a freight line from Melbourne to Brisbane through hundreds of rural communities. And this freight line is welcome and will make a huge difference to our community. However, there is no mention of rural or regional passenger services being upgraded in any of the project material. We share the same line. It will be freight and passenger service. We'll upgrade the freight service, but there's no mention of the impact on passengers. So the only consideration of passengers is for a positive benefit gained by removing freight from Sydney and reducing congestion around Sydney. So this amendment really aims to say, of course economic is important, but so too is social, and we must name it. If I could briefly talk about the Inland Rail. This inland rail freight route should not be considered in isolation to passenger transport. The two consistently overlap and share much common infrastructure, and with improvements to the national freight network having the potential to increase passenger traffic safely and reduce congestion. There is little dedicated road or freight infrastructure in Australia. In most instances, road and rail freight operators share infrastructure with passenger services. And this situation largely exists because of cost. It's generally more cost-effective for transport infrastructure to be used together. And in regional Australia, even more so. It's important that we share infrastructure. And the Australian Government and the Australian Rail Track Corporation, the ARTC, have clearly outlined the economic benefits of the Inland Rail project. It will save time, it will reduce supply chain costs, it will improve access, it will create jobs. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, I call out to you that economic and social benefits are not mutually exclusive. We need both. And why do we need both? We need both because in North East Victoria there's a huge problem with our train line. It's not just Melbourne to Wodonga, which is the particular bit I'm concerned about, it's the whole freight route. It's the whole transport system is absolutely working below capacity. The North East line suffers really poor service, one of the worst in Victoria. Services are late, and as they were this morning, there's currently 23 speed restrictions along the track. The system is not working. Now, the issue has been brought to a head with the Australian Rail Track Corporation, and they've scheduled track works. Now, the fascinating thing was that this work happened last weekend, which, for those of you from Victoria know, was our long weekend. So we had the cancellation of train services, we had buses put in their place. It was a debacle. And why was it a debacle? Because we don't put passenger services up there on an equal footing with freight. And that's what this amendment seeks to do. Interestingly, the line between Melbourne and Wodonga, for my colleagues' interest, it's not classified as a premium line. So if you were to travel on the line between Melbourne and Bendigo or Melbourne and Ballarat, you get a premium service. Now, the service on that line is not premium. And you'd ask why? Well, the reason why is because 5 years ago the Victorian government signed a 50-year contract with the Australian Rail Corporation and put into place the standards of service at a lesser rate for Albury-Wodonga than they are from Bendigo to Ballarat. Like, why would you do that? And I asked the people in the gallery to think who was in government 5 years ago in Victoria. So we've got huge problems that need to be addressed. And what I'm trying to do today is say it hasn't been enough to rely on the goodwill of the V-Line. It hasn't been enough to rely on the goodwill of the Australian Rail Track Corporation. It hasn't been enough to rely on the goodwill of the government, because we in North East Victoria have experienced the utter devastating result of that. So this private member's bill says that when we are building railway or upgrading railway, we need to make sure that freight has the same, or that passenger service gets treated in the same way as do our freight lines. So we've got a bit of movement to do. So what does the government need to do? The federal government needs to change its terms of reference with the Australian Rail Track Corporation. They need to bring the standards to an equal level. And the federal government now has an opportunity, as it upgrades the freight line, this inland freight line between Brisbane and Melbourne, which will use our rail track. There's an opportunity to actually upgrade it to get us premium service, and I call on the minister to do that. But the problem's not just with the Commonwealth Government. The Victorian Government has a really important role to play here. They need to commit to upgrade their rolling stock. They need to commit to actually doing a much better job on regional planning. And if I could just, Mr Deputy Speaker, refer to the Connecting Regional Victoria's Regional Network Development Plan. In this, there was a commitment made to, in the budget 2016 and 17, to put $2 million into planning, so that on our line we could plan for the long term. The Victorian government also allocated $15 million to fix up some of the trains. And I'm calling on the Victorian government now in this budget, the 2017-18 budget, to seriously fund what needs to be done. So that means fix up the line, that means give us better rolling stock, That means renegotiate the contract so we have a premium service. That means really seriously look at the passenger needs from Albury, Wodonga, Wangaratta, Benalla to Melbourne, and how we can actually get a shuttle service happening, how we can develop Seymour as a hub. So, in conclusion, and bringing my comments to a close, before I move that this legislation gets a second reading, the Australian government has an opportunity to provide leadership. It has an opportunity to make real commitment to regional Australia, and it is an opportunity to actually act on a real-time problem that's not political, that's in their power to act, and would make such a difference to the lives of students, families, businesses, and unleash the capital that we know we've got in North East Victoria. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I move this bill be now read a second time.
I thank the member for Indi. Is the motion seconded? The member for Melbourne.
Deputy Speaker, I second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Question is that the bill be now read a second time. The time allotted for this debate has expired.